Hi, I'm Eric Doyle, and this is OGV Energy Live in person. Today, we're going to meet with Mike Adams, the CEO of Elemental Energies. We're going to find out what makes Mike tick. We're going to find out some of his views and perspectives on the energy sector today and moving forward. And we're going to find out a bit more about the Elemental Energy story. So let's go and meet Mike. The last time that we met was at a charity evening. And you looked very cool in your kilt, and you came up to me. We met as we were going outside to get some drinks or whatever, and you came up to me and you said, Eric, I need to talk to you about your TED Talk. And we stood for about half an hour unfolding the whole topic and sort of passion that we have for endurance sport and doing these horrible things that we enjoy doing. And I found out from that your origins in that were in triathlon.
Yes. Yeah. Swimming and then triathlon. My origins, in kind of professional sport is triathlon for sure. And then really, pushing the endurance envelope. In the triathlon space.
We do these horrible things.
Yeah.
Why triathlon? What was it for you, swimming and triathlon? What was that?
I mean, being good at something as a kid is really attractive.
Right.
And it's not that, swimming is obviously difficult, and it's a really important skill, and I love seeing, kids do it. But it is, relatively easy in some of these sports to get pretty good. It's just, it's practice, and it's just continuous practice. And that's my personality, is kind of getting into something and practicing at it. And I had some success in swimming that way. And I think that's what really attracted me to that was, from a young age, it was something I could chip away at. It's incremental improvement with time. It's not overnight success. It's not, you don't have to master something, on day one. And it's this long-term thing. And I really, really enjoyed that in swimming. And so for me, moving into triathlon was things coming together at the right time with Commonwealth Games and various other things in your life as a sports person that aligned with me moving into triathlon. But it was a very natural fit. Swimming is a big part of triathlon. It's probably it's the most technical part. What's interesting about triathlon is it's outside, which I really liked. That was a big difference from being stuck in a swimming pool for 20 hours a week, all through school, all through high school anyway. So then suddenly being outside was really nice, big outside guy. And open water swimming is particularly challenging and particularly technical. So I really enjoyed that. And triathlon's quite international, so you get to travel too, which is a really enjoyable part.
When you talk about open water swimming, many years ago, I had taken over a company, and we did a big sort of hoorah evening in Aberdeen. We took over a bar round about offshore Europe, and we sort of launched this company with the press there and all that. And we brought David, can't remember his name, a famous Scottish swimmer. David Carey.
Yeah.
David Carey, absolutely. Yeah. Through Rowan Shepherd's company, Red Sky Management. We did a bit of work with them. And David's partner at the time was a champion open water swimmer. I can't remember her name. Hannah?
Yes.
Maybe Hannah?
No, I'm going to...
You know what I mean, right?
I do. I know Carrie-Anne Payne.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm standing talking to her.
Who famously swam without goggles.
Yes, exactly.
Which is incredible. Wow.
And I said, open water swimming, I just, some of the distances that she's doing, I said, it must, you must have had some amazing stories doing it, because it can't all be just like peachy and roses and sunshine. And she said, one time I was swimming in Scotland, open water, and I was swimming away, I was in the zone, and I bumped into something, and I thought, I don't know what this is. It's a funny texture. She'd swum into a dead dog's carcass, and her head was inside it.
With no goggles.
With no goggles.
No.
Yikes.
Yeah. Yikes. I did a race one. I won an open water race in the Thames, going back 15 years. And Kerry was there. She was racing, but she was racing with her dad. She would have beat me probably if we went head to head. But she was racing with her dad. That was really nice. But yeah, I've got a lot of open water stories. I mean, it's unlike swimming in the pool, which is very sanitized and controlled, which is also attractive about those sports. Is it's very, very controlled. You're racing in the same environment every single time, which is nice that you can measure it. It's like track and field without the wind. But open water swimming, there's almost no measuring from one race to the next because you're in a totally different environment. But it's incredibly aggressive, open water swimming. And that was one of the biggest surprises to me, was from going from being between two lane ropes in a pool, untouched, to suddenly being in a mass of fish, basically, of kind of elite swimmers. It's quite enjoyable as well, and it brought kind of tactics into it more, all of which I think help in then triathlon. And then once you start to get longer, and like the distances you do, the longer you go, the more tactics come into it.
Oh yeah.
And really in swimming and track and field and running and stuff, when you're running for 10 seconds or you're swimming for 50 seconds or 2 minutes, there's no really, you're going as hard as you can.
Hard as you can.
Maintain technique, tick all your things off on your list. But you're ticking things off on a list for a minute.
Yeah.
You're ticking things off on a list for days.
A week.
And a week. Yeah. And I think these are the things, maybe as you get older, they start to become more, interesting and attractive to you as someone who likes, sport. Is right. Can I put my brain to use now?
Yeah.
As you get older.
That's right.
How can I use these things to my advantage? And I was speaking to someone recently about marathon running, and they were talking about, people are obsessed with times, and I don't care that much about times anymore. But it was this, these kind of mental barriers people have, whether it's 3 hours or 3:30 or 4 hours. And I was explaining to them, I said, look, in my mind, to run a 3:30 or a 3 is very, very similar. You have to be incredibly fit to run a 3:30, and you have to be slightly sharper, but just as fit to run a 3. To me, that all comes down to experience. And maybe if you're 20 years old, you can just do a 3. But once you're a bit older, where you fit in there just comes down to what's in your head, and have you done it before? And this person was saying they did a 3:30, but they could have gone much faster because they hit the wall, which is a familiar story. But they may not have if it was their 10th marathon, and that's what interests me, is that mental game in endurance sport.
You've also gone on to do Ironman.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the tattoo on your calf?
No. So I actually met my wife, Nicole, through triathlon. So at the time we were in Canada and I was racing kind of Olympic distance, shorter triathlons. She had been a high level marathon runner and was starting to race Ironman. And so we met through that, and she went to Kona actually, which we say was our first date in Kona.
Oh, you're romantic.
Yeah. That was fantastic. And so we kind of, we really came up in that world, and we're around, some absolutely incredible athletes. And we both know people very well who have won professional, Ironman and things like that. And so for us, participating and doing an Ironman, while amazingly rewarding, we saw people maybe getting a tattoo when they won an Olympic medal and things like this. And we just always felt like, okay, we don't deserve it. People like David and Carrie Ann, who I think, I'm pretty sure they have the Olympic rings. To us, that's a real, it's almost, we want to respect them. Yeah. And interesting talking about David and people like in triathlon, Fraser Cartmel from Forest, and these are local people who have done incredible things in sport and won races all over the world. Mm-hmm. And it's a fantastic sports culture in the Northeast.
We'll talk in a second about how you pull that through and what that, because I've been asked many times, how do you think, some of the things that you've done have pulled through into your domestic and commercial life? And I have no doubt that they do, and they all work together. Going back, where was growing up for you? Whereabouts?
So I did grow up here. I am Scottish, pardoning the accent, but I had a very mixed kind of cultural upbringing between the Pacific Northwest, North America, and here. My mom is from Alaska, and we have a lot of Alaskan heritage in the family, which is really interesting. My older sister, is also born in Alaska. My parents met there in the oil patch with Chevron in the 80s. And then I spent a huge amount of my time, as a kid, traveling around both to California, where my parents had also lived, and to Vancouver in British Columbia. And so when the time came for me to study, one of my biggest kind of goals was to get over there to Vancouver, fantastic university, UBC, University of British Columbia. And from an engineering perspective, one of the best schools in the world, really, along with University of Aberdeen as well. So I was lucky to feel like I had these two schools kind of open to me in these two cities. But yeah, I mean, I did obviously meeting my wife there as well. Vancouver plays a big part as well in my life.
Right. Okay. So where feels like home?
For me, home is where my kids are.
Right.
And I'm so used to travel with work for the past 10, 15 years. I'm used to traveling with sports. I can feel pretty comfortable anywhere.
Right.
And I do really enjoy being out and, now moving around our offices and things like that. And, Nicole will go with the kids back to Canada for 8 weeks in the summer.
Right.
And, when we're there on an island with the kids in the sun, that's home for sure.
Yeah.
And, we have family there as well, which helps. But here in the mountains, in the heather, that's different. That's almost spiritual.
Yeah.
I think.
I know what you mean.
And whereas I love, I love, landing in Vancouver to see Nick and the kids in the summer, just as I love, landing in Houston or wherever to spend time in the office, to land in Aberdeen is different.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Was it always going to be, because you went in to do mechanical engineering at uni, right? And you've studied UBC and also here in Aberdeen, right? Mm-hmm. Why mechanical engineering? Was that always going to be the route?
No, not at all. I mean, I've always been quite an ambitious guy, I would say. And I was keen to kind of explore that and whichever way it took me. I was good at numbers. So, I mean, engineering is an obvious choice. But I did think about taking other paths and maybe going into, banking or something along those lines.
Really?
Yeah. No, definitely.
Oh my goodness.
And what's interesting now is our CFO, Mike Dafford, who comes from the world of big investment banking. There's many things he says, and I'm like, yeah, I would have enjoyed that. The challenge, and you're, in that industry, you're really set loose, and allowed to be challenged. But engineering for me is definitely what my brain is designed for. Do
you reckon? You reckon you were built for that?
It's practical, It's
right.
The thing I love most about what we do is delivery. It's project delivery. I'm not necessarily one to get stuck into solving equations, although problem solving is really interesting. But the reward you get from delivering something big is really, really strong. And just with mechanical, I mean, there's so many different types of engineering. And it's amazing because people think about an engineer as an engineer, electrical, chemical, it's all the same, but it's so different. I mean, an electrical engineer is working, in my mind, in this crazy land of things you cannot see.
Yeah.
Chemical engineering is the same. They're working at, a microscopic level. And for me as a mechanical engineer, I need things and physical things that I can see. And I do think that, this is probably something we need to do better, I think, with kids in education, is understanding how they learn.
Yeah.
And I am a physical learner. If I see something, I've got it. And that makes sense that I'm then drawn into mechanical. Whereas if it was ever something I couldn't see, I struggled with.
Right.
And therefore I'm not your electrical guy.
It's funny you should say it. My son is carrying on the family tradition. I think since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, there's been a Doyle pulling a cable and wiring a plug, right? Since electricity started becoming domestic and commercial, right? Honestly, every male in my family all the way through has been in electrical engineering. and including me. I started out life as in electrical engineering, and my son decided, with no pressure from me, to go and do electrical and electronic engineering at Cali, and he's in his second year down in Glasgow.
Right.
And I thought, this is going to be great. So about 6 months into his first year, headed out to Glasgow to see him, to see how he was getting on. And I thought, this is going to be great. We'll go out for a beer and we'll talk all things electric. So I thought we were going to be talking about high voltage distribution systems and bus bars. And I was ready for this conversation. I said, what are you doing just now? He said, oh, it's really interesting. We're designing an Internet of Things, an IoT support network for a small town. And I'm also learning how to write in C. And I'm like, should we just order a pizza?
Yeah, this is the new world. I mean,
the new world. Yeah, absolutely.
And what that does, that's giving engineers literacy.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily fundamentals or principles, but they need that. Without those skills, how are you going to have, a 30, 40-year career in engineering if you don't master those things? Whereas, I remember we were MATLAB back in the day. And then MATLAB is still around, but it's interesting the skills you need now coming into engineering compared to what I needed, what you needed, going back decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Straight out of uni and into the family business?
Yes. Yeah, pretty
Norwell?
much. Yeah, pretty much. And it's interesting you saying about, parents and my dad was also a mechanical engineer.
Right.
We don't have a couple hundred years of engineers. But interesting, we do have, and again, that's what's so interesting, I think, about the Northeast is we have a couple hundred years of people staying here.
Right.
And Scotland has a fantastic history, especially if you go to Canada, a fantastic history of people going overseas and pioneering around the world. But it also has this incredible kind of, commitment, to places like the Northeast and places like Aberdeen. And so it's interesting. I love looking back through my Scottish family and just seeing people who have always been here.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. But yeah, so he did mechanical engineering too, but absolutely no pressure. I mean, I think what you grow up around though is what you get comfortable with.
Right.
And it opens your mind to what's possible in that space. And whether that's having music in the household and seeing, oh, I see that music can be enjoyable, versus trying to teach a kid with no music around them, you should play the violin. It's a really hard task. It's the same with things like skills and engineering. So I saw what was possible. And from a really young age, I was exposed to oil and gas. I remember in one of my first kind of years in the industry, it was Talisman. And it was the drilling superintendent at Talisman at the time, who was a consultant. And he said, oh, I remember you when you were in diapers. And I was like, oh, great. Like, how? Please, tell me more. And it had been, I'm going to get it wrong, not Britoil, some, late 80s, early 90s oil company in Aberdeen. And there'd been, it was a pre-spud or a DWAP, one of the two. And there'd been, 20 or 30 guys gathered to do the pre-spud. And for whatever reason, I was Ian's responsibility that day. Something had happened and I couldn't, go to nursery or childcare. So me as an 18-month-old was brought to this pre-spud, and he literally just dumped me on the ground, and off I was, crawling underneath the conference table, bumping into people, and I would say at least 3 or 4 guys from that meeting I know and bring that up. So
18 months old, it's DWAP pre-spud on your CV. I love it. It's in the blood.
And I've always spent a lot of time with my dad as well. So I was very inquisitive as a kid. What's going on? Tell me, And I remember we would go running, or I would ride my bike and he would run. And I would literally just say, just tell me about what's happening.
Yeah.
I pray my kids do that to me. I think I would love that. Be like, yeah, I'll tell you everything. But, tell me what's happening. Tell me about a project or something like that. So I was always interested in that. And so, to join Norwell, almost 15 years ago now or even before that, because all through university, I worked there, was a pleasure.
How did Norwell Edge come about out of Norwell? How did that all work?
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, Ian, he had been through Norwell, he had been dragged into the Macondo trial as an expert witness.
Right.
And so BP had asked him, can you please come from a well control perspective? Can you come and lend your expertise to the trial? And the trial was in 4 phases, and this was phase 3, which is all about capping stack capping process. And as a result of that, all through that, probably 2011, 2012, 2013, there was a lot of talk, both at work and at home and just between Ian and I about Macondo. And I mean, a horrendous incident that absolutely could have been avoided. And I think anyone, intimately involved with knowledge of what happened got a sense that the human factors part of it, which is often the most frustrating.
Yeah.
As an outsider looking in and equipment failures, fine. Even big failures of kind of process, fine. There's not so much responsibility there. But when it comes to human factors, and you go, like, if this and this had been done by an individual, or they had felt more empowered, or they had felt like somebody had their back, these are, they're things that really get to you.
Yeah, of course.
And you think, we have to do better.
Totally avoidable.
Yeah, we have to do better in those areas. And so we were really, really pleased when, I think it was OSPRAG was the name of the committee.
Yeah.
All the main regions in the world created these committees, but in the UK, I believe it was OSPRAG. And they had convened a group of experts in the UK to come up with almost independent findings on Macondo. And all the global findings were very, very similar. But one of the main findings in the UK was human factors.
Right.
So we were very pleased that this was something that was going to be addressed. And credit to the UK, what that led to was, I believe, still the first and only published set of competencies for Wells personnel in the world. And a fantastic step to take. One, we absolutely had to take it as an industry. And there are many other areas of competency that we have to work on, but fundamentally when it comes to, major, accident hazard avoidance, and especially when we're looking at deep water well control, Wells is it.
Yeah.
And this was a comprehensive set of guidelines. But what do you do with it? Yeah. So we sat there going, well, within the company, we have a really strong culture around training and competence, and everybody wanted to do something with it internally. But there was this like nagging, question of, but hopefully somebody does something with it bigger. Okay. And I guess the time came where we thought, well, why not us? I mean, we did a lot of work to take those competencies and effectively to integrate them with our training program to ensure that as a minimum, our personnel were both getting the training program, but also tapping into those competencies. And it was then just a process of, right, how do we then take that forward? And that was a really interesting, starting in 2012, but going all the way through until we launched in 2017. Taking Norwell Edge forward from that kind of 2014, 2015 period, one of the big questions that we had to ask ourselves is, how do you, disseminate this information? We had a good handle at that point on the training material and what we were trying to achieve in terms of the competencies, but how do you actually do it? What do you want to achieve in doing it? So it has to be something that is engaging, and ultimately, if people don't get through the material, they're going to struggle with achieving the outcomes. So how can we make it more engaging? But at the same time, how do we tap into the largest possible audience? So this is back in 2015, and at that stage, e-learning, and there's a ton of work that's been done in e-learning before that. I accept that, but it was still relatively niche.
Right.
We had NIST, which was kind of an early, an incredibly successful and a pioneering move into that space in the kind of commercial energy side of things. But really people's experience was university and pretty rudimentary, e-learning portals at that point. So trying to figure out, right, we want to use e-learning because it's going to take this out to the widest possible audience. but kind of up against it, because 99%, more than that, of oil and gas training was being done in person. So the overwhelming feeling of the norm was this should be done in a classroom.
Yeah.
You can also charge huge sums of money to train in person.
Yeah.
So people are kind of going, you're crazy. Like you could charge whatever, a couple £1,000, £5,000 per person per course for a week to sit them in the classroom. Why wouldn't you do that? But you could do that, but you're gonna access people in the hundreds, and that's fine. But is it really what was intended by these guidelines? And the intention was that Osprey would publish and the industry would do something about getting it out there, and ultimately improving our workforce. So for us, e-learning was it. E-learning was the way. But we really had to kind of pioneer a way of doing, engineering type e-learning, especially what's especially challenging is with well stuff. You're dealing with things subsurface. So there's some conceptual things in there that are quite difficult to translate. But we did it, and we started small. We started with 10 courses. We did a beta test. We'd reached out to students.
Okay.
What we liked about students was they're really engaged. So they would give you feedback, and ideally you're making a difference because they're about to go into the industry and you're going to arm them with something. So we reached out to the SPE. We connected with student chapters at universities all across Europe, North America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and India. They were the regions primarily. I think we ended up with 3,500 students that participated in a 12-week test. And to me, it was eye-opening just how many student chapters there were. But even at that stage, it was interesting to start to see how you were getting more engagement in the emerging markets than in established markets. Okay. We had almost no engagement from the UK. So when I say Europe, we had engagement, say, from Hungary, Austria, I guess OMB are there, Poland, but not from the UK. The student chapters here were struggling a little bit more with engagement. Whereas,
why do you think that was?
I think it's the same now. I mean, I think that what would pull you in to the SPE in the UK is informed by years of what you've seen, where the industry is going, and not necessarily where the industry is going pragmatically on the ground, because we see that and it's exciting and there's lots happening, but where you see it going, in your kind of public impression of the industry. And there is really no public support for, SP's petroleum engineering. We've seen in the UK a drastic reduction in petroleum-based courses, both petroleum geology, petroleum engineering. I think petroleum geology is now down to a handful of petroleum geology courses in the UK. Now, I get it, and I get that potentially the word petroleum is not the best word there.
Right.
And maybe the courses need to have and the courses do have a different mix now. That's the thing.
Yeah.
They do. They've moved on. Academia is incredibly innovative, and these courses have moved on. But there is definitely something to be said for the narrative around just the petroleum sector, the oil and gas sector generally in the UK, and what that has done. I can get it from a policy perspective, and I can get that you're trying to achieve an aim, and maybe there's some collateral damage, and maybe you take some steps like the EPL, and which I think is horrendous, really, for what it's doing to the sector. But I understand the political game that's being played there, and I get it. And as people in industry, we kind of have to roll with that and play our own political game to try and get our message out. What I don't get is the fact that is clearly having a negative impact on academics,
right,
and therefore students, and therefore kids who we need to feed into this sector for the next 30 or 40 years. We need to encourage the next generation of engineers. We have to, support them. Geology generally, geoscience generally, is getting hammered in the UK.
Right.
And therefore there's a correlation between, petroleum geology on the down, being diminished, is having a broader impact across geoscience. And I think the negativity around oil and gas is having a significant impact on geoscience in the UK. So there's a correlation here, and that kind of, political game around oil and gas is having ramifications that probably nobody wants.
Right.
I don't think the politicians mind if Apache and Harbour have a hard time. They don't mind, really. We mind, because that's not great for the future of energy, full stop. But the politicians don't mind. I do think, though, the politicians and everybody cares about academics and how we develop educationally our kind of next generation in the UK. And that's absolutely something that we've seen here. But as part of the Norwell Edge journey, we've had just phenomenal interactions with students, and we still are. I mean, it's amazing how things the word travels.
Right.
And we've never done a lot in Azerbaijan, but in October, someone in Azerbaijan got word of our free courses, and they're all available online, free. Everyone should go and do them. And they just did it. They posted on LinkedIn. They tagged a bunch of their friends, and we had hundreds. I mean, 300 or 400 people in October alone from Azerbaijan did these courses. And these are all young, new graduates or soon to be graduate engineers. And it's just fantastic to see that, enthusiasm coming from that kind of engineering community. So we really tapped into that. We knew that was a good thing to do. We were going to get that engagement from them. And that whole group, back in 2017 of 3,000 had a big impact on just how we built, nicely engaging and absorbable material for engineers. And really from there, it grew. I mean, that was 10 courses in 2017. And then it went to 40 and 70 and 100. And like we now have about 100 courses, and a lot of work recently, since the pandemic on the gaming side and kind of building really interactive, first player models of kind of offshore installations that people can play on and learn on and do real world examples. And look, there's a ton of applicability for that outside of oil and gas as well. Oh, yeah. I mean, once you can do it for oil and gas, you can do it for anything that's physical that is difficult to sit someone down and say, hey, close your eyes, imagine you're somewhere you've never been. And then imagine something down below the surface of the earth.
You can actually put them in that spot virtually. Amazing.
Put them on that spot virtually. And one of the most interesting things we did during the pandemic was we worked with a collaboration of operators, all stemming out of OUK, who are the holders of these competency guidelines now. And we worked with a collaboration of operators to build kind of almost minimum training in the well integrity space.
Right.
So this is affecting people on production platforms who are day in, day out dealing with wellheads and trees and pipe work and valves, and really helping to give them just that next layer of understanding of, okay, but what goes into that? What's happening down there that affects you up here? And I really think that's maybe getting into that sweet spot for e-learning.
Okay.
Where you're really distilling stuff down to, you're not trying to create an expert. I'm the first to admit it takes years, of work to create an expert in something. And it does need a blended approach, and you need that immersive in-person experience, 100%. But for e-learning to be able to access, thousands of people, and that well integrity course is, I think it's 6,500 people have done that in the North Sea now. You can access thousands of people. You can do it relatively quickly, over a couple of hours, say. And even if you're only giving introductory level information, if you have 6 hours of introductory information on what is a topic you can do a PhD on, but 6 hours is better than no hours.
Yeah.
And if you can apply that over a workforce, the law of averages in terms of, just arming people with tools, that's a really, really valuable tool. And I think in the engineering space, that's where e-learning can be incredibly effective. It's to arm more people to spot the signs of failure.
Yeah.
And I think whether you're offshore in the North Sea or you're in a production plant building Boeings, we need more people
aware, tuned in.
And as an engineer, it shouldn't just be the engineers going, well, I'm the person that understands failure and understands, how this process works. Everybody involved in that process should have enough knowledge that they can go, well, the engineer hasn't called me up, but I'm seeing what's happening here, reacting before the failure. I see what's happening here. I'm not happy. I'll put a stop to this and we'll call who we need to call. Yeah. As opposed to, oh, something is cracked. Now I'll call. And I think that's where e-learning can just have a huge impact.
The whole topic of learning, you're clearly passionate about bringing, people into industry, training them, putting them through academia. Do you still link back to your academic days? Do you see any of your lecturers or professors you worked with?
Yeah. I think there's an element of nostalgia which draws people back in, and I don't think that's it for me. I loved my time at both universities, but I feel practically drawn back in. I feel like there's a practical reason to keep those links up. I've both in Aberdeen and in Vancouver, I've had incredibly valuable long-term relationships with, keeping that discussion open with lecturers and heads of school and stuff. And here in Aberdeen, during Edge development, I had a ton of support from the university, open arms, offering support, letting me use space at the university, connecting me with digital, experts, even experts in how you ask, questions, and a really interesting educational theory that they offered up. That's really useful. And as someone, building things and either whether it's going through the industry or you're trying to actually develop something, that can be incredibly useful. With Vancouver, it's a much bigger school. It's a really very large school, very large engineering department, and that was where I had probably my most formative kind of educational experience. And that was I vividly remember it was a course called engineering entrepreneurship or something to that effect.
Right.
And they had brought an outside, like a visiting professor from industry to teach this course. And the gist was, you got taught a lot of really interesting kind of business skills in the context of engineering, but the gist was that you had to come up with a business idea. And the whole course, you were always thinking about what's this going to be, and then you had to do a business plan, and you had to pitch it. And that process for me was fascinating. I mean, I had got hooked on geothermal energy as a concept when I was there. Right. Canada has always been, North America and Canada have always been a hotspot for, Canada less for geothermal production, but certainly for tech, geothermal technology. They've always been at the forefront. And there were some interesting things happening back then in geothermal tech, and I kind of got hooked on it. And so I was big on this, and I still am, but I was big on this in those months. And so I had built a business plan around this, and I got a ton of support from the visiting professor, and he taught me some really valuable lessons about, get out there, engage with people, ask for help, and I, together we kind of engage with industry, and I got, we started a company.
You started a company?
Yeah.
What age?
19, and it was called. I can't remember. It was called PVNRT. Which is an equation.
Yeah.
It's an engineering or a physics equation. But it was all about natural resource technologies as it related to geothermal. And what's actually really cool is the concept was to use some of this new tech on a local geothermal site in British Columbia. I mean, one of the main challenges in geothermal is the kind of location of the resources, and then electrical transmission costs. There's a lot of interesting kind of things there, but there was this site, and I mean, it's a great idea, actually, apart from some of the transmission costs. What's cool, I mean, it was cool to do. It was very, very, for me, rewarding or formative, I guess, to see how, even at 19, you've got no skills to actually deliver on that. But that doesn't mean you can't pull together some really useful information and concepts and actually take it forward with help. And it was very kind of encouraging to see that help be relatively forthcoming from both academia and industry to go, you know what? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's see how it could be done. Now, maybe they were using it as an exercise for me too, but it really did show me kind of how to progress things, how to take things forward. And this last couple of weeks, I was back in Vancouver for Christmas, and I got a meeting, or I was invited into the school through kind of mutual friends with the dean, the head of engineering, and he's a fantastic guy, overseeing an incredibly large and complex engineering department and research department. And we were talking about this, and I was explaining how something like that can be so formative that it's not even just that 10, 15 years on, you're looking back and going, oh, that was a great experience. You're looking back and going, that has informed every month of my life since that point. I mean, really, especially taking that forward and starting a company, and really, that was it. And I really did not look back from that point on. It was always about, right, how do I do this again? How do I actually do this in the real world? And move towards making something like that happen at scale in the real world, in industry. I got the bug from that class, but that professor, those people in industry who kind of offered up their time. And I was sharing this with the dean, and I was explaining, what we're doing now, which includes, a lot of interest in geothermal, and we're working with Canadian companies as well in geothermal now too. So
amazing.
This really nice kind of loop of interaction with that school, with University of British Columbia. And so yes, I think to me it's really, really important to maintain those links. But it is more than just for good times. There's real benefit, I think.
Yeah.
There's real benefit for people to maintain those links as they progress. Because you can also start to, inform from your experiences how, people should look at industry as well. And I'm very passionate about that in terms of, especially when we start to talk about energy transition. And like we were talking about earlier with things like petroleum geology, we need strong voices saying this has to be maintained. These courses and these skills have to be maintained. Yes, it's called petroleum geology. Let's change the name.
Yeah.
But do not back away from what is, the British pioneered geology globally. We cannot back away from such an important subject.
Right.
And I don't know what future you look at in the energy transition where you don't see subsurface interactions happening, whether that's geotechnics for building, for constructing piles, whether that's obviously for CCS, geothermal. We're going to be continually interacting with these environments. We have to have those skilled people. They come from academics, and there needs to be an interaction between industry and academia.
I have this theory. We spoke earlier about your endurance sport triathlons and your Ironman and all that sort of stuff. So I've got this theory, which is not scientific by any means at all. It's just my own theory with people that I've met, and from my own experience. When you look at 19-year-old Mike just saying, yeah, why shouldn't I just set up a company in geothermal and do all of that? I have this thing that people that have pushed themselves to that point of maximum physical and mental endurance and tested themselves, and over and over again to try and better, putting themselves physically and mentally through the mill. I believe once you've done that, it kind of sets you up for, everything else in life. I've been through the biggest mental and physical stress I think I could ever have, right? Apart from being horribly ill. So I honestly believe that sets you up for not an arrogance or a confidence, but just a belief in yourself that this will be okay, we can do this.
Yeah, I think it's reference points, but it's skills. It's genuine skills that you can use. I mentioned it earlier about like incremental improvement. I think it's so important that from a young age, but you can use it your whole life, that if you chip away at something, you get better.
Yeah.
That's one part of endurance sport. I think it's fantastic. The other one is preparation. you have to be ultra prepared. And if you're not, and you'll have nightmares about it. You'll wake up thinking, I forgot all my equipment for the race kind of thing. These are the things that you think about. Yeah. And it's utterly applicable in business. Very much so. Total preparation as much as you can at all times. But I think that the main one for me is when things go wrong in a race, you can't get help. There's no outside assistance. You can't get, no one can touch you. You can't go back to your house. The race continues. People are passing you constantly. Everyone is flying past you because you've stopped. The only thing you can do is just take one step forward. Yeah. That's literally the only option. If you want to finish, if you want to reach the finish line, the only thing you can do is move forward.
Moving forward. Yeah.
Keep moving forward. And forget business, for life. To me, that is the best thing you can take out of sport and endurance sport is just keep going, just keep moving forward. And it's a little less black and white in real life because you can ask for help and you can lean on people and that's fantastic. But yeah, to me, endurance sport and the translation into the business world is a strong correlation.
Looking at where you are today, we've been through the sort of commercial journey up to a point. You're now CEO of Elemental Energies. I don't think your age is getting to do this. Still quite a young guy, but now in the big seat. I guess my question is, before we go into what Elemental is all about, where your focus is and where you're taking it, is from someone who in the Norwell Edge days was doing hard sums, developing things, software developers and managing things and doing all of that and actually doing it. And from the sort of person who's come from mechanical engineering, doing hard sums all the time, now into the big seat with this sort of more holistic focus. What have you seen in terms of the personal transition from the doer and the deliverer to now the sort of overseer of everything? How does that feel? It feels very natural. I miss the big machinery for sure, and I always will. But I have cars and Land Rover Defenders that break down and all these things. But ultimately, that's what we're doing as a company, day in, day out. And I love dipping into technical meetings and project meetings just to see, what's going on. And we have incredible people around me that's their passion. So it's my passion, it's their passion. So I get my fix of that from my team and the people that I'm around. Do you have to resist the temptation to dive in?
No, they're way better than me. So no, it's like, again, as an engineer, you need to know black and white, they're better. So no, 100%. But I mean, the Norwell Edge experience, I think, was invaluable. Yes, it was more on the kind of tech side, I guess, but it was really, really hands-on. I was dragging everything forward, kind of, especially through pandemic and to create something that's really cool and has a purpose as well, which is really, and that's what I'm really loving about the job now, is that we have an incredibly clear strategy and there's a reason for why we exist. And I think without that, I wouldn't be, satisfied. Right. But with a clear purpose and a clear vision, a clear strategy that I can really get behind, that's really interesting. I think in terms of CEO as a job role, it's obviously very, very difficult, very taxing. You have to work with, oversee a lot at any one time. But whether you're doing it for the first time or doing it for the kind of fifth time, there are pros and cons in that. And I think that doing it for the first time, you can bring a creativity to the role that somebody, not everybody, of course, there's incredible CEOs out there, but somebody doing it for the fifth time, I've done this before. This is how I did it there. This is how I'll do it now. That's why you've hired me.
Open the toolbox.
This is how I do it. That can be incredibly valuable in times of crisis, for turnarounds, all these things. I understand why somebody would want to bring in that. But when creativity is required, vision, strategy, and I guess maybe an open-mindedness, and what we need now, I think, in energy more than ever is open-mindedness. Right. We need it as it relates to really traditional parts of the sector like oil and gas, but of course to the transition, how the two marry up, the pragmatism that's needed in that space in between, which I think is where Aberdeen has to operate over the next 20 or 30 years. It's the space in between. We have to sit in between all of these worlds. And that does require an element of open-mindedness. And that's one of the benefits, I think, that whether you're 35 or 65, if it's your first time doing the job, yeah, you're coming in, you're open-minded, you're thinking, right, how do I want to do this job? And I think that's one of the benefits. Obviously, it can be very useful to have, to be sitting there and thinking, well, I've done this. I encountered this problem when I was CEO of Schlumberger or whatever it was, and this is how we did it. So I think for me, that's one of the things I have to do is make sure I've got that toolkit. It's not my toolkit because this is my first time, but I've got that toolkit at arm's length. So whether it's through our chairman or my CFO, COO, and just people in the network who I can go, how would you do this? How have you've encountered this before? What have you done? And it forms, and I think what's important is that should form part of the decision making, not be the decision. Right? That should be things you take into account when taking difficult decisions. But I think if you can bring that open-mindedness, you start to create a more bespoke environment in your company. And ultimately, that's what drives real big growth.
Where would you say you've got what Elemental is today, but I know that you and the team are taking this in a particular direction, in many directions. What is the major focus for Elemental today, and what's the reason for that, and where is it going?
Mm-hmm. And that question is fundamentally what excites me about Elemental.
Right,
is the fact that it is going somewhere, and there is a reason, there is a focus. I mean, at the core, and if you look at the businesses thus far that Elemental that we've acquired, both through Synergy Wells and Norwell, these are deeply technical wells businesses, right? Well engineering, well delivery, doing it all over the world, and have Synergy for 25 years, Norwell for 35 years, incredibly experienced, highly capable businesses. These are skills that are utterly in demand now, in 5 years, in 15 years, in 30 years. We do not see any drop-off. If anything, we see an increasing need for these skills.
Okay.
If you look forward and see an aging oil and gas sector, that doesn't mean an end in E&P, and there'll be lots of exploration happening in different parts of the world for the next 20 years. But there invariably is more well integrity problems. We need to do more interventions. We need to do production enhancement. When we then start to look at, we very much classify decommissioning as an energy transition activity. It's to us, decommissioning is pivotal for the transition. If we don't decommission, it means we are neglecting assets which fail and which cause, in some cases, irreparable harm. So when we look into the transition, and we first stop is decommissioning. We have to do it properly. There has to be done with efficiency, of course, but with an expert kind of technical oversight as we're doing that. And then we look even further in the transition, and we see geothermal, we see CCS. And these aren't things as well, 25 years away. I mean, these are things happening now. So the skill set that these companies have is totally invaluable. We have to maintain those skills. That's, as you can tell from an engineering perspective, I believe that really, that if we don't build and maintain those skills, where are we? We are the ones responsible for the transition. We have to deliver it. Government doesn't deliver transition. They set policy, and then it affects the supply chain and industry. We react. But fundamentally, on the ground, we deliver it. We're going to do the designs. We're going to, plan the projects. Companies all across the Northeast are going to build the components. We've got the vessels. We are the ones that have to do it. So we know how important it is to nurture and develop the skills that are going to be critical for that. So that's at the core of the strategy, is how important those skills are. And really, that the fact that that's overlooked, that people look at oil and gas as a bad thing, and they look at the skills and look at the supply chain and think, well, we don't need that. We absolutely do. So that's a critical part. And when you look at us growing and when you look at us acquiring more companies, it's because we think we need more of that. And bringing those engineers and those technical professionals together in one space, integrating teams ultimately benefits clients, allows us to provide, more efficient services across a larger number of projects. It gives us the scale effect. That's really, really important. The other part of the strategy, which is really exciting, is where the industry is going, and who ultimately is going to be doing the work in 20 years' time. And we don't see Equinor, as an example, going anywhere. We don't see Shell going anywhere, Total Energies going anywhere, Harbour going anywhere. These companies are utterly committed to energy, full stop. They're not dying on a cross for oil and gas. Yeah. They are delivering a service globally. And globally, yes, we need oil and gas production. And in 2050, we'll still need 20% production from oil and gas. But we'll also need a lot more. And they are rapidly transitioning into that space. And they're very aware of what that means for them. That means more areas to focus on, more regions. They're focusing just as much on oil and gas now as they are on CCS and decom and all these other areas. And all those things put a technical stress on these companies. So we view the future and we view the transition as still being built around a lot of the same clients as we have now. And we want to build a long-term partner. We're building that future partner for those, clients all across the world, small, medium, and large, who are themselves thinking, what does the next 20 years look like? I think that's what's unique about what we're doing, is we're sitting here, not just thinking about, oh, yeah, it would look good if we put this on the website, and it would look good if we, maybe we should dabble in that for the next few years, see us through. We're genuinely making 20-year roadmaps for where energy is going, what the supply chain has to look like, thinking deeply about how things are going to change, even just from a project perspective. A really interesting, angle when we think about project delivery is oil and gas had a long time to grow up, 100 years to grow up. The nature of oil and gas, which is heavily exploration-led, also impacts that. Exploration is relatively slow, and so major oil and gas projects develop over 10 or 15 years. They happen quite slowly, and you can build into it. That's allowed pockets of supply chain to build globally in a nicely measured way. The transition is going to be chaotic in that respect because CCS has to happen rapidly at scale in big ways. Billions will be deployed from the get-go on projects. We're not going to have 40 years of nice and steady. It's going to be billion-dollar projects from the get-go. Decommissioning is the same. I mean, say what you want. The reality now is we have billions to do, and we have to do it relatively quickly. This requires a totally different approach. It requires major project delivery, quite big teams, people who've done it before, and people who are really building a service with knowledge that is what the client, we know that's what the challenge is. And we're building an entire company around it. It's really, really exciting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned 2050 and, the next 20 years and all that sort of stuff. If we could do the H.G. Wells jump in a time machine and shoot forward to 2050, what's your perception of what the supply chain is going to look like, sound like, and be like? Is it going to be incredibly different from what we see today? Is there going to be major advances? You're shaking your head already. What do you think?
Yes, it will invariably be different, of course. But I think my view is very different from what maybe, more broadly in the public or in politics they would think. I mean, this idea of the oil and gas industry closing is just false. It's not going to happen. It's, we both need the innovation and the skills and the equipment and the technology that this industry has, but we also just need the industry. I mean, we can't escape that. And I think there's not enough clarity around the role that plays going forward. But the idea of starting a parallel supply chain to do something it's utterly impossible. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of skilled professionals in this industry. We will be the professionals to deliver the transition. 100% we will be. We're the best for the job. We know how to do it. We're passionate. We're incredible in oil and gas at innovating. And I think just in the Northeast as well. I mean, we're innovators for 150 years more up here. And we have an incredible supply chain, incredible network up here to do it. And we can take this and the skills we have here and take it globally, both across the North Sea and in the Gulf. And the reality of delivering the transition will happen from within oil and gas. You know, we oil and gas has a lot to do. We have a lot to continually improve upon, but at the same time, it will be these companies. It will be the operators of the North Sea that are helping with CCS. We see certainly in geothermal that so much of the investment pouring into geothermal is coming from oil and gas companies. That's not from any, charity. They see that as the future. That's a game-changing future technology. Now, selfishly, they're thinking, well, I'm an energy company, so I can benefit from this future energy supply. I mean, they want to provide people with the energy they need, for 100 years. Mm. And that is going to require geothermal, and it's going to require, big innovations. But my God, I mean, we have the skills to do it. So no, I firmly believe that, yes, the supply chain needs to innovate, but we are innovating. We need to keep doing it, keep transforming. But there's a long future for, we're in West Hill and DICE and all over. There's a long future for the people here and the people that work here to help, play a major role in the future of energy.
Brilliant. Love that. I have a question for you that I typically ask leaders when I meet them, and I ask this question in various guises. We say the term "smooth seas never made a great sailor."
Oh yeah.
So the role of the CEO or any leader in any company that journey can be filled with sort of choppy waters at times. I'm always interested in, as the CEO, as the person with the eye on the future and everything that's happening, when there are those wobbles, markets take a dip, the client's not paying or whatever it might be, whatever the drama of the day, the week, the month might be, what's your true north? What's your stick that you grab to keep the team on track? What's the thing that you go for just to keep everything solid and on track? What do you go for?
Yeah. I'll maybe give you the kind of official answer and then the more sadistic answer. But I think, being serious, I'm a relatively calm guy, right? And I really believe in cool heads prevail. And that comes from sport.
Yeah, of course.
There's no, if you fall over on the bike and you got 200 miles to go, there's no point panicking. You get up, assess the damage. What do I have? What do I have with me? What do I need to go and buy at the next store to get me going? No one's gonna get that, that bike going again except you.
Yep.
Now I'm lucky that, we have a whole entire company and we have a whole team, but that really is at the core of it. When things aren't going well, you assess, you stay calm, and you lean on those around you to help you fix. But it's also about, hopefully creating a culture of calm and a culture of we're doing something bigger here. I'm not abandoning you. If this goes wrong, I'm not abandoning you. Everyone around you, everyone involved in the company is really in it. And we know what we're doing, and that helps with that calm. Panic sets in when you go, is this the end? There's been a problem, even if there's lots of problems. Is this one problem too many? And in our case, absolutely not. We will fix them and we will move on. And I think that's a genuine response on that one. I think, more fun is this idea of, what actually is a success or a good, what is good, what is bad, what is success, what is failure, and why do you think it's good, why do you think it's bad? For me, traditional success is often quite underwhelming. And I've heard this a million times over, that you come away from it and you go, oh, like either you're sad it's over, whatever it was, whatever you were working on, you're sad it's over. Or you're kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, of course that happened. Of course we won, or of course we
That's why we did it.
Because we did it, and we deserved it, and everything, and I firmly believe that you can, if everything goes right, it's kind of, it can be, it can be both boring and not, not very surprising. But when things go wrong and you have to battle through it, when that doesn't actually result in the win, or when things go wrong and everything kind of falls apart, building back up can be the long-term success.
Right.
And overcoming the challenge can be ultimately what creates, a more successful business, or actually contributes to the long-term victory. And recently, I was listening to a podcast recently with Geraint Thomas, the kind of Olympic champion cyclist on it, Welshman, proud Welshman. And he had a really, really interesting take, which was, he was reflecting back on just this combination of kind of the 2018 Tour de France, which he won, and the 2023, the equivalent Tour de France in Italy, Giro d'Italia, which he lost narrowly, as what is now considered like an old man. He's like 38.
Yeah.
And he was just reflecting on what is considered to be his greatest success to what people look at as like an abject failure because he just missed out and he lost on the last day kind of thing. And it was like, oh my goodness, massive failure. Your last chance. You'll never, you'll never recover from that kind of thing. His perspective was totally opposite. That when he won the Tour de France, he was cruising. He had the best team in the world around him that had just won like 5 Tour de France's in a row, with the most money coming into the Team Sky, and he was in the best shape of his life. He had not a single failure, not a single puncture, not a single mechanical. And he got to the end of the race and he was like, yeah, if I hadn't won, it would have been horrendous for me not to have won. And it was not the elation that he thought. I'm sure it was good, but reflecting forward to this race, he says, I'm in better shape at that race. I should really have won that race. I was in better shape, but I encountered problem after problem. And he was winning for a long, and then he got knocked back, and he got back up, and he was leading again. And
so there was fighting.
There was this real fight. And to get to the end of it and to come second by like 20 seconds over, hundreds of hours of racing, he was like, yeah, who cares? I am coming out of this rewarded and stronger, and my team is stronger around me because we've overcome a lot and still come second. That was, I mean, maybe because it's still fresh. It was only 6 months ago for him, but he was basically saying that was the most rewarding thing of his career. Against the odds, still coming second. And I really like that. I like that. Not necessarily, it doesn't apply to everything, but I think to hold that in the back of your mind, that when you see people around you having, big success, yeah, okay, but maybe that was inevitable because they've been, they're in the best shape of their life with the best team, and yeah, of course they should have done it. They should have won in that circumstance. But you could be sitting there challenging, struggling through something, but ultimately you're going to look back on that and think, well, yeah, without that, I was nothing. And to me, it's tying it back to sport, but I think it's a really valuable perspective. I try and kind of hold on to that.
Hey, we started at endurance sport. We came right all the way through your journey and all the amazing stuff you do with Elemental and beyond that. And we tied it back into sport at the end. This has been brilliant. And I think we could have done a couple of hours on this. So why don't we agree at some point in the future, we'll check in
100%
and just see how the journey's going. What's the next run or event that you do?
It's a little further away than I would like, but it's in October doing the Inverness Marathon.
Oh, it's a cracker. Have you done it before?
I've done the half.
You've done the half.
Yeah.
You will love it. It's got a horrible ending to it, but it's a fantastic.
You should do it.
Yeah, I should. I've been ill for a year, so I'm getting back into it, and I'm going to start from about in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to start again, getting back into training and sign up.
We'll go for a run.
Absolutely. Hey, this has been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the best in what you're doing with the team and the family and all that. Mike, thank you.
Cheers.